welcome to Mentality Meets, part of the Mindshift Forum 2022, conversations that explore mental health stories and strategies to help leaders like you change the culture of mental health in your workplace. I'm Peter Larkham, mental health instructor and expert, and your host for today. So this year, our theme is hope. What is it? What does it look like? Where do we go to find it? And so today, we're going to be talking with Victoria Maxwell. Now, in this session, we are going to discuss mental health triggers, the depths that it can take people. Is there any kind of specific turning point that ignites hope for recovery? And then we're going to finish off with words of hope for anyone who's currently suffering and words of hope for those who are supporting people. If you'd like to join the Mindshift Forum 2022, please sign up and take the Hope Assessment at www.peterlarkham.com and find the Mindshift Forum tab. For those of you watching on YouTube, please like this video, leave a comment and hit the subscribe button to get all the latest content to help you with your mental health journey. Anyway, let's not wait any longer. Here's my conversation with Victoria Maxwell. Victoria, I'd like to just take a moment and ask you to introduce yourself and just explain where in the world are you and why on earth have you taken this time to talk to me on Mentality Meets?
I am on the west coast of Canada in a little place called Half Moon Bay in British Columbia. And why I have taken the time to do this is I think I can speak for myself, but also from speaking to others that hope for me right now is extremely important, considering all the things that we're going through. And I know, particularly for my own mental health, how important hope is in terms of sustaining recovery. And I guess in some ways it's being able to have a discussion about it, not only to maybe share some of my own experience, but also to hopefully just have a good discussion and for me to maybe gain some in sort of inspiration and motivation as well. And I think that's probably it.
Thank you. And yes, I should probably introduce that because this year, as part of Mindshift 4 and the Mentality Moots, is all about hope. We're going to be talking about what does it look like? Can you give it to other people? Can you go somewhere and find it? All kinds of in your community, in your family, in your friendship groups, and how we begin to maintain hope or become people of hope, or if you like, hope carriers. And can the hope that we have for recovery and for people who are struggling with mental health illnesses, can our hope rub off onto other people? And if we are struggling for ourselves, can we find people of hope and let it rub off onto us? That's kind of where we're going on this. And it's going to be an entire year of conversation. So we're going to talk to someone every month through the podcast and on video chat. So, Victoria, I just want to ask, can you give us a little bit of an understanding around your diagnosis of mental health illnesses, when it started, what you saw as some of the triggers at that time, but also if it is something that is coming back again and again and again, are you aware of triggers and feelings? And I've asked you literally 100 questions right there. So let's kind of keep it nice and simple to give us a little bit of a background of when you first realized that it was starting and what you experienced at that time.
For sure. So I'll give you a little bit of background about where I am and then I'll sort of backtrack. Years and years ago, I was diagnosed with rapid cycling bipolar disorder with psychotic features, generalized anxiety disorder. And disordered eating. And I was an actor before I was diagnosed. It sort of derailed my career as mental illness can sort of, explode people's lives sometimes. And when I got back on track and I was working 9 to 5, I started writing and I wrote 4 one-person shows. And now for the last, 20 years or so, I've been touring them at conferences and events to give people a chance to more comfortably talk about mental illness and realize that recovery is possible, that living a good quality of life is possible, despite even if you're experiencing symptoms. And so what happened when I can say when it started was way back in the womb. I'm just kidding. But my mom was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was experiencing symptoms before I was born, and it wasn't until I was about 7 or 8 when she was diagnosed. So it sort of runs in my family, and there's mental illness on both sides of my family. And I was quite an anxious child. No one really sort of saw it. There was a lot of chaos and upheaval, a lot of trauma in my family, a lot of rage. And I progressively got more anxious and more depressed as I got older. But I was a really good people pleaser and covered it up, and sort of was part of the, I was an only child. So I was sort of like the clown as well as the caretaker and the peacemaker. And so no one really knew how I was really feeling. But internally, I was really suffering. And then when I transitioned from in Canada, we call it sort of high school into university, is I started dealing with disordered eating. So not full-blown bulimia, but a lot of restricting, compulsive exercising, dieting, all that kind of stuff. And it was a way really to control the anxiety and depression that I was experiencing. And I guess I'll talk about the triggers in another section, but what continued to occur was I graduated from university and the depression got worse. And I didn't notice too many of the manias, and your audience probably knows, but manias are when would be feeling elated or euphoric, things like that. My inhibitions would be gone, things like that. But what I really noticed was depression, suicidal ideation, and a lot of anxiety. And as that got worse, I was really trying everything I knew to help myself. I was in therapy, but then I was trying a lot of new age kind of things, and nothing was really doing it. But I continued on what I felt. I needed to find a spiritual path. So I went into meditation, and I guess the nature of depression is where things feel meaningless and hopeless. And I honestly felt like if I got to a place of enlightenment, whatever that meant, I would feel peace. What did happen is I went into a meditation retreat and went into a psychosis. And this is in no way saying that meditation causes psychosis or mental illness. It certainly doesn't. But it was the first time I'd ever meditated. It was a long retreat. It was very intense. And so psychosis was when I was hearing things and seeing things and believing things. And I was more or less like in a very expanded state. For those of people that are listening, it was also a Kundalini Crisis, so you can look that up, where there was lots of energy going through my body. Anyway, and I ended up in the psych ward. I was involuntarily committed. And what happened was I was diagnosed with brief reactive psychosis and released, and then didn't really do any follow-up. And it happened again. And I was formally diagnosed with what I had said earlier, rapid cycling bipolar disorder, but really just refused to accept the diagnosis. And I think a lot of it had to do with feeling that my experience, which to some degree was very personally profound, because I had a lot of sort of insights spiritually, what I felt, as well as very psychotic as well, were really pathologized by the medical system. And so for about 5 years, I was in and out of the hospital, in and out of depressions, in and out of psychoses. And it wasn't really until I met a psychiatrist that was able to help me recognize that I could have both sort of spiritual transformation as well as mental illness. The two weren't separate. And since then, it's just been a process of getting to know what my symptoms are, getting to know what works specifically for me, what those warning signs are. And I call them sort of the fingerprint warning signs, because everybody has very specific ones. Excuse me. Some are similar and we have things in common, but some are very, very specific to each of us. And so recovery has been hard won, and it's been a chance for me to really get to know myself, and also learn to depend on my own internal resources. But I have not done it alone. And I think that's one of the most important things.
Wow. I'm trying to absorb all that information because there's so much there. So we're talking about from the age of 7 and kind of the chaos and kind of university and graduating and beginning to experience more of the suicidal ideation and the context of the depressive state of your undiagnosed experiences at those times, the meditative retreat and the context of psychosis kicking in while on a meditative retreat, which in my mind, just blows my mind a little bit because that's almost what you're aiming for in the context of spiritual engagement and
I know
the context. And I can imagine that at that time, that must have been incredibly confusing.
Oh, it was. It was really, really confusing.
And then being involuntarily put into the mental health care, getting the diagnosis, and then this process of about 5 years of a lot of ups and downs in the context of your mental health. And now I want to try and just unpick a little bit of the language around the psychotic episodes and the depressive states, and because it's language that we hear a lot, but if you've never been there and you've never experienced it for yourself, you're kind of thinking, yeah, I have a bad day too. And I think the context of it is lost in interpretation. So can I ask you to, if you are able to talk through a period of time where you were at your deepest, darkest place and what the symptoms were at that time, outside of the context of it was depressive and it was psychotic. It's like what was actually happening in the context? Does that happen?
And to be honest, I'm going through a bit of a storm right now. Even though, I can laugh and I can communicate and things like that, but there's this sort of what I call a wallpaper feeling of depression. Now, this isn't one of my darkest periods, but I know that there's sort of similarities to it. But in the really, really dark pits, it's a whole body experience where there's a total fatigue and malaise. And so no matter how much sleep I get or how much exercise I do, I can't kickstart myself into getting out of that fatigue. And a great psychiatrist I worked with called it a biological barrier. So there's a certain point in depression where maybe just before, where it's very mild, doing exercise and getting light therapy and things like this, or talk therapy, can really sort of kickstart you and sidestep that. But when it gets to be, really severe depression, the biology of it prevents those things from really helping, which is really hard because I don't know about other people, but I really tend to hold myself responsible. So even when I'm feeling severely depressed, I still can forget that it's not my fault. Because most times I'm still doing all the things I need to do in order to not let myself get into a further depression. And other things, for me, oversleeping. So really just wanting to hide into the covers, under the covers, not wanting to connect with friends. I really push myself to stay connected because I know how essential it is. But isolation, which is a really common symptom. And I don't even like calling them symptoms because they're sort of just a result of a lot of times, because it's just this feeling of Tara Brach, meditation teacher, calls this trance of unworthiness. And she's not speaking about clinical depression, but there's this sort of like veneer, or almost like, how slugs have that slime over them, feeling just unlovable and not okay and shame. And so it's multi-layered. It's both on emotional, it's psychological. My thoughts start changing. So normally where my thoughts are fairly, either they're neutral or they're quite positive, they become quite negative and exaggerated. Anyone who's familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, where they're sort of, you're exaggerating things so you think it's never going to be okay, or you assume the worst, catastrophizing, things like that are really part of it. And then spiritually, where I feel very disconnected from the world. So the natural world, where I don't feel safe. I don't feel part of something larger than me. And I don't necessarily mean God. I just mean, the world in general, where I feel like where I belong. So it's a very difficult place to exist and withstand, and tolerate. And a lot of it for recovery is about learning to just be with these really often intense, uncomfortable experiences and sensations. I know. And now on a really bad note.
I think the just hearing it sounds exhausting.
It is.
And it sounds so lonely.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of phrases that you used about kind of the wallpaper or the veneer or the slime on the slug, which I think was just brilliant. But the image that instantly came to me when you were talking about that was, I apologise in advance for cultural context here, but the Japanese environment with the sliding doors and the rice paper between is that there's stuff going on there, but you can't see it, you can't hear it properly, or kind of, it's not tangible. It's like it's in another space, and you're not a part of it. And what I'm hearing in the context of the symptoms and the experiences that you have in those times is this soul disconnect with almost everything, and I deliberately kind of use that word of soul, is that it's something in here. It's not that people aren't right next to you or around you, but it's the ability to engage with that and feel love, acceptance, warmth, depth in the context of just everything going on.
Yeah, there's a flatness and a lack of vitality and an inability. So, I mean, I can sort of sometimes find blips of it, and that's what I try to hang on to. I go, oh, there it is. And, and try to turn the boat towards that as often as possible with gratitude, with things that I know that bring me joy. But it's sort of a memory, a sort of like a very distant memory, and a wish that I can sort of reach out and actually touch that. And that to me is part of what hope is saying, okay, I'm going on faith here. And maybe it's part of faith of saying, I'm just hoping that that's still on the other side and I still have the ability to get there. So I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other and go day by day and be able to eventually sort of move back into that current and that flow of love.
Because in your language just then, you were talking about kind of faith and hope and a belief. And I was talking to someone just yesterday, and it was the context of belief versus fear, or faith versus fear. And it kind of just got me kind of twisted into that I think it's a Bible verse that says faith is the evidence of things that are hoped for. And there's no guarantee to it, but you still hope for it. But it's the faith of the belief that it's quite complicated. But then the fear steals that faith away from you. The fear of the irrational expectation that appears real draws you away from the ability to have faith and have that hope. And the question that I want to try and understand and try and explore with you is there a moment in the context of mental health illnesses where you're really struggling in that place? And because you said it's almost like your brain begins to have something. It's almost tangible. And I was talking to my aunt about this, who, bless her, is getting to the point where she fairly regularly goes, "Oh, it's like she knows. There's something in her brain that knows what she's trying to say, but she's like, I can't get it." And it was that feeling that you were giving of kind of your brain longing to get back to that place of recovery, knowing that it's possible. And I suppose kind of the question is there a tangible turning point for you? Is there a moment, almost like a light bulb moment, where you're like, I know recovery is on its way. I know that I've turned that corner. Or is there not? And what's your experience?
I think there are many turning points, right? Turning many different corners, because it's not that linear process. And I think it was something that you said about being able to sort of notice how fear is taking away that energy of faith or stamina or encouragement or anything like that. And so right now I'm dealing with an intense amount of anxiety, and it's physical as well. So it's there's a lot of talk about, where you focus on the love and not the fear and things like that, or how it's very difficult for them to coexist. But when it's so physical, which is often the case in clinical sort of diagnosis, it's sometimes difficult to bring that self-compassion or that love forward, whether it's self-compassion or letting it in from other people. Not that it's impossible, but where that turning point happens often is when I'm with other people. And so it's sometimes what they say, but a lot of times it's not necessarily what people say, but it's that I'm in conversation with them and I feel seen or validated, or we're just in conversation and I forget myself and I'm not navel gazing anymore. All of a sudden I find myself laughing, and I haven't laughed in a long time. And that gives me a sense of, okay, I'm back. I can be myself. I like that. That's me. Okay. And it might go away. in a millisecond, but it gives me that sense that I can have hope that it's going, there is something there. There is something to keep going. And I know I love Winston Churchill's saying of, when you're going through hell, just keep going. And to me, that's something. What it is that having those little experiences are the turning points. I wish it was something simple where a light switch flipped. Recently, I did have an experience like that where I really just sort of seemed to change my mind and let things come in. And I honestly, I'm not sure if what it was that I did that and I then suppressed all my feelings because then about 3 weeks later, all this stuff came bouncing back. So I know it's a combination of my own effort, my own ability to use my will in a positive way, and also allow life to meet me halfway, so that it's not all my responsibility. Because I think that's part of what's really difficult, is that feeling when you're so depressed and so anxious that you're working so hard and nothing is working and it's all my fault. And then it just becomes this ball of unhappiness and disappointment. And
yes.
Yeah.
And I think there's something so precious about what you've just said about that when you're in that place, it's the self-blame and the self-loathing and the shame. But also what you then said about the recovery is that the recovery isn't just down to you. It's a combined effort from a lot of people. And I know that there are a lot of people who listen to Mentality Meets who are the supporters of those who are struggling with their mental health. And we're going to come back to you guys in a little bit. But as we've kind of been talking about all of this, I want to try and understand time frames. Because the time frame for me of sickness is days, possibly weeks, you know. In fact, just after Christmas, yes, we are in January, just to remind everyone, January, Christmas has just happened. And on December the 27th, my 3 boys all were sick in the night, and then sick for the day. And to be honest, it was probably one of the best things that happened to our family, because we shut down and just sat on the sofa and did nothing, like for a day and a half, and it was just epic. But after that day and a half, everyone was okay. We're all back to eating and engaging with going out for walks, and it was like, boom, done. And there is something in my head, therefore, that thinks, oh, mental health illnesses. It's just a short-term thing, isn't it? And I want to just ask, in the context of feeling the symptoms beginning, to the depths, to the recovery, what time frame are we talking about here?
You know, I wish I had a better answer, a more hopeful answer, and a more consistent answer. Because I still have sort of these reoccurrences, and sometimes the reoccurrences do sort of clear up in a week because it's mild. The symptoms are mild. I'm able to sort of readjust things, and I get back to sort of my good baseline fairly quickly. Other times, depending on circumstances or other things that I may not even be aware of, it takes longer. Particularly, I think when someone's first diagnosed and they've been battling something for a long time, or for myself, like right now, where I've got a lot of life stressors and there's other sort of a reoccurrence of quite severe anxiety, it takes a lot longer. And the interesting thing is some parts of my life can feel better before other parts of my life can feel better. So my work may be going well, but perhaps physically I'm still feeling really fatigued. So it's this fine balancing act. I would say that the idea, like a headache where you take an aspirin and then, in a couple of hours, or if you have a migraine in a few days, you start to feel well again. I think it's unrealistic, and it's unfortunate to put that picture to people. And I don't think people do. I just think that that's sort of our point of reference because we talk so much about physical illnesses. And with mental health issues, I think it's very influenced also by a person's like where they are in terms of readiness to accept the illness. And loved ones probably really know this if they love someone who is just not accepting that they have any difficulty at all, and so they're not proactively involved in their own care. Symptoms can prolong for much longer. If people who need medication aren't taking medication, symptoms can come back. So for me, I mean, it really, when I got really involved in my care, it probably took, I'd say a couple of years to really get back on my feet. I started feeling better within probably 6 months or so. But then with reoccurrences, it really varies. It can take sometimes 6 weeks. It can sometimes say 3 months. It's really variable, and it's up and down. And I don't think it's necessarily the same for anyone because everybody's condition is so unique to each person.
Mental ill health costs UK employers around £1,700 per team member each year. That's a staggering £45 billion every year. Despite a general awareness that mental health is more of a problem than ever, most people have no idea what to do. This is where we can help. Mentality is a 1-hour video course equipping your staff to spot the signs of poor mental health and take action. Invest in your people, from the cleaner to the CEO, because every person, whoever they are, can be affected.
So, in answer to the question, there isn't an answer. It's too varied.
I was going to say, like, that was a very long-winded question, and I think I made sense to the point where it said, yeah, there really isn't any standard answer.
No.
I guess, if anything, I would say that it probably takes longer than people want.
Yes. And I think there's something brilliantly refreshing with the truth of that answer.
Yeah. It's not what people want to hear, but it's...
But I think also, when we begin to think about the context of the workplace and the return to work context and people struggling with their mental health, getting signed off work, getting a diagnosis of mental health illnesses, and then the time that it takes for them to get, if you like, back on their feet. I'm trying to think of different phases because language is a weird one. But getting back to a place where they feel like they were before their illness. And I think that's really important because you can recover in part, but coming back to where you were before, that's a long time period, isn't it?
It can be, yeah.
And so in the context of that, we then got what recovery looks like, and is recovery sustainable? Now, I ask that deliberately because I know that for yourself, there have been good times and then it's gone down and it's come back and it's gone down and it's gone back. And there's something in my head that wants to believe, and I don't know whether or not this is a kind of, I want this as a hope, but the reality is far from it, is firstly, do you find that episodes tend to be shorter now that you understand the recovery cycle? And so before, like 2 years, now 6 months or 6 weeks, or that it hasn't lasted that same context of time for recovery, but also it's the sustainable context, because I know, common cold, that I will get a common cold again in the future. And that's just a given. Because if I were to say, no, never going to get common cold, I'm hoping people would look at me and go, yeah, no. No. But with mental health illnesses, I want to believe that there is a sustainable recovery context where there isn't that constant cycle of better, worse, better, worse. And I don't know, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. It's the sustainability.
Yeah, and I think also it depends on what conditions you're talking about as well, and the severity of it. And so similar to the answer before is that there is no standard answer. But what I do believe is that people can, and I can say for myself, where particularly for my bipolar disorder, it goes into the background much more than it used to, where it's sort of like instead of the tail wagging the dog, that's no longer happening. And anxiety for many, many years for me was very much in the background. I wouldn't even really, I mean, I maybe was always a type A personality and anxious to some degree, but not sort of experiencing anxiety attacks or anything like that. Currently, I'm experiencing anxiety, and I'm in talks with my psychiatrist right now to sort of figure out what's the sort of being the trigger. But generally, I see a trajectory of it going up and sustaining itself, especially with a certain awareness and consciousness of the tools that keep me well. But within that, if I have episodes, they're more mild. So if I have, so I know that in November and January are often times where I'll feel a bit blue, but I'll make sure I have my light therapy. I'll have my vitamin D, things like that. And so I might expect it, and sometimes the expectation of it lessens the actual experience of it. And also gives me more of a sense of empowerment, because I can go, oh yeah, of course this is happening. All right, it'll pass, not a big deal. As opposed to fighting it and getting all scared that, oh my God, I don't know what's happening. And I think that's why in the beginning for people, because they're not familiar with these symptoms, they don't know if it's going to get better. It's so much more frightening. And so ironically, the more episodes you've had, you go, and the more that you've had sort of come through them, you go, oh yeah, I've been through this. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, this one's really bad. Oh, but I've been through this before too. And so I think managing them can become we can be very skilled at it. And episodes can have gotten much less. So those, I would say that's what happened. Whether they completely disappear, I certainly haven't had many manias at all. Psychoses, I've had very, very few, maybe just like 2 after the main ones before I was diagnosed. But so most of it, the struggle has been with some depression and anxiety. And both of those, particularly with the depression, have gotten better, much better over the years. And being able to sustain a quality of life has been easier.
And I think that for me is where the hope is. That's what is hopeful. Now, the thing to also acknowledge in the context of what you've just said is the more episodes you have, the easier it becomes.
I know. And I would say the more experience and maybe the more awareness around those episodes, which is sort of funny, right? I know. It's
like the language, again, coming back to the context of language and understanding that, because one person explained to me that kind of when I was first diagnosed, I had anxiety, and it was this thing that kind of possessed me almost. And they said, now I experience anxiety, and it no longer overtakes me, but I understand that it's there, and I understand that I encounter it on a regular, semi-regular basis, but it does, like you say, it doesn't have the same hold over me that it once had.
It's sort of that, I think people may have heard, where my mental illness doesn't define me anymore.
Yes.
And there may be times where I feel very identified with it, and it is all encompassing, and then I'm able to move out of it. But generally speaking, I don't necessarily see myself as someone who is mental illness. I'm someone who has a mental health condition, just like I have hazel eyes. I'm 5'6". I have a dog, all that kind of stuff. So.
I've absolutely loved this conversation, Victoria. And I have 2 questions that I want to finish on. If you'll just take a moment and explore this with me. So, the whole year is going to be about hope. And I want to ask, are there any words of hope that you can give to anybody who is listening to this episode who is in that place at the moment? And you were saying before about being in the storm, but being in that place of really struggling with their mental health. And are there any words of hope that you can give to them?
Hang on. Just hang on. Hang on to anything that gives you a sense of, I don't know how to describe it, of here and now and solidity, because cliches are cliches because there's truth in them, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. The scary part is you don't know when you're going to meet that light, and really lean on the people around you when you need to. don't go this alone. It's much more difficult to do this alone. And really know that that strength within you is still within you, even when you don't feel it. Like, that is the part that I think is so critical, is that we oftentimes mental health, mental illness can grind down that belief in ourselves, to think that all there is are outside supports. And those outside supports, like I just said, are really important, but you still have that internal strength. And also really reminding yourself that you're worth recovery and you're worth fighting for. And so please, please, please just keep putting one foot in front of the other, even though it's really, really hard. Because I know from personal experience, I know from just the last couple of days how hard it can be. But there is much to be gained by just keeping on, and it gets easier. It really does get easier, and it gets better. It gets better, because, like they say, the one thing that's constant is change. And so, if you're feeling bad, that means you're close to feeling better again, right? Because it's going to change.
And I mean, even in that, there's hope, isn't there?
Yeah.
And the final question I want to ask you is: are there any words of hope that you can give to anyone who is listening to this episode, who is supporting someone, supporting a family member, a friend, or a loved one, who may even be getting to the point of having nothing left to give?
Yeah, exhaustion.
Is there any word of hope that you can give to them?
To some degree, it's almost similar. I would say, don't do this alone. Reach out to support groups, do self-care, get good boundaries. Know that, especially if you're a parent of an adult child, do not take this on as your fault or feeling responsible. And, was it something that I did as a parent? Did I do something wrong? What could I have done better? Really letting go of that. A lot, I think, is like when you said, when people are really feeling spent, because honestly, I have a line in my play where depression has a cutthroat way of dismantling empathy. And it does, right? It's not always easy to support someone who's really severely depressed or really severely mentally ill. It doesn't mean that we don't love them. It just means that we have a certain limit to our capacity, and really honor that. Really honor that, and just know that that's totally human and totally natural. And it doesn't make you a less loving person. And with that information, find the things that you need to do in order to support yourself, so that you can be there for others when you need to be.
Victoria, thank you.
Oh, you're
Thank
welcome.
you so much for your time.
You're such a light. You're such a light. I'm so excited that you've got this show and stuff. It's so fabulous.
Thank you. And it's so exciting to explore the context and the world of mental health and mental health illnesses. And I'm really excited to see what this year brings.
Me too.
And I think to just wrap it all up, and just to Victoria say thank you so much to you for your time, is I just want to end with a phrase that I hear again and again and again, which is that there is hope. There is always hope, no matter how desperate you feel. And find the people around you who can ignite it within you.
Find those hope holders.
Yes, hope holders. I like it. We might hashtag that. So if you see hope holders hashtagging around, we started it. You and me.
Yeah,
right here.
yeah.
What an amazing session. Exploring the context of mental health symptoms and the impact that they can have on people daily. And also remembering that hope for recovery, and that even when we feel like hope is lost, we can find those hope holders, or the people of hope. Now, I hope you enjoy this episode of Mentality Meets, and no matter where you are on your mental health journey, you can find plenty of content and information about our resources at peterlarkham.com, including one of our mental health courses for you or your business. And please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find our entire back catalogue of conversations with mental health leaders and experts. If you want to spread the word, drop us a review on the podcast app and share this with your friends. Thanks again for joining us for Mentality Meets, conversations that explore mental health stories and strategies to help leaders like you change the culture of mental health in your workplace.